KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon, 8,000 people, I think. The floor is packed here. The people who are manning the booths are just saying that it's just a little bit overwhelming, and it says to me, it speaks to the real rise of open source, really, kind of as a mainstream thing. And in that respect, then, they're the people who are managing these open source projects and the roles that they play in helping develop these technologies and making them commercially viable, but really beneficial to the end user. So I have a group of people here today who I really look forward to talking to about the projects that they're part of and the work that they're doing. So why don't we start with you, Jared? Why don't we introduce yourself and we'll go from there?
All right. My name is Jared Watts. I am a senior maintainer on the Rook project, which is hosted by the CNCF, and I've been involved with the Rook project since the very, very beginning. So that kind of got me really started into the open source communities and really broadened my horizons of other open source projects after that.
Cool.
My name is Ihor Dvoretsky. I'm a developer advocate at Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and I'm mostly involved into the Kubernetes world, but not only. So I'm in constant touch with almost all our CNCF projects, which we have today, more than 30. So, yeah.
Great.
So my name is Wei Fu. I'm the Director of Engineering leading the Cloud PKS, which is the commercial SaaS offering for Kubernetes from VMware. Also, VMware has a lot of open source efforts, so I'm also in the loop for that as well.
Great. So why don't we begin with you then and talk about developing a SaaS-based product like your Kubernetes offering, and then the work that you do in open source. And how do you think about that? How do you balance that?
Okay. So that's a very, very good question. And so maybe I can talk about the journey of us building a commercial SaaS offering within the VMware. So internally, we actually did take on-prem solution that we built internally and decided to take that stack and transform that into a SaaS offering. And when we built the stack from day zero, we want to use the technology that actually, if we can use open source community, that would be the best outcome for the company as well for the open source community. So internally, when we picked the SaaS control plane for managing to deliver this managed Kubernetes service experience, we're actually specifically picking the open source technology. I think one of the technology that within the VMware is also owned by VMware is this open source project. It's called Lightwave. Lightwave is an identity stack. It's a full stack of identity, provides identity management, certificates, and so on and so forth. It's not that well known. So the project itself is actually, it's open source, but it's not also an open source project. So that's also one of the initiatives I want to learn from this community, how I can take that project, converting that into actually an open source project rather than open source code. So we've taken all this technology, we're actually making sure that we can convert these innovations so that we can deliver this business outcome for the company. So I think it's quite a journey for us, taking on-prem solution converting into SaaS. There's a lot of operational learnings that we've gone through throughout this journey.
So that's really thank you very much. That's a very nice overview and description of kind of your work and the work that you're doing at VMware and some of the other projects that are related to the Kubernetes project.
So I only touch base on the SaaS offering because you started mentioning that. However, in the VMware in the VMware Kubernetes offering, there's this PKS, which is the on-prem solution, that actual commercial solution from VMware, which actually specifically using, for instance, the open source project, which is incubation, the Harbor project. So the Harbor project has been really critical feature that actually demanded by the enterprise customers from the VMware, because if you look at the application lifecycle, there's day zero, day one, build the application, write the application, build the application, and the next step is deploy the application. By deploying the application, you have to use this container registry, image registry, how you deliver the registry, how you secure the registry, how you make sure the authenticity of the registry. So Harbor actually brings a lot of enterprise-grade user experience to the directly delivered to the enterprise customer that VMware has. And also Harbor, from day zero, when the creator Henry Zhang in Beijing create this open source project, is really just solving the problems engineering has. In 2014, the engineer saying that where am I going to upload my image? So he started these ideas. So from very, very beginning, Harbor is actually a community-driven project.
That's interesting, because it shows kind of like how it shows why there are, why software development and open source projects really are global efforts, right? And the needs are the same, right? And there's a need, for that project. And so I'm curious from, Jared, you're one of the first to be involved in the Rook project. What motivated you to be involved in that project? What was it that drew you to that project itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was a team of us actually that founded that project. We were all currently at that time in a company called Quantum Corporation, a storage company, and so we saw a need, as Kubernetes, the community was growing, to provide a persistent storage solution that actually runs in the cluster, because most people were, relying on an external storage solution that has to be set up and managed and run somewhere else. But what can you do to actually have Kubernetes itself manage your storage? And so there's been a lot of growth since then in terms of the feature set, and the special interest group for storage, and Kubernetes has done amazing work to kind of grow that base of what Kubernetes as a platform can do for providing storage. But that was the real motivation at that time a couple of years ago, and it was a team of us that founded that project that wanted to do something with it inside that company, Quantum.
So what is Rook addressing? What is that issue that Rook is addressing that provides kind of that ability to address storage for Kubernetes, and how is it evolving now? And what is the development of the project?
Yeah, so there's the original vision is still something we're finding to be ringing really true with a lot of the users, where you can't always depend on a cloud provider as a managed service. If you're running on premises, you don't have EBS, you don't have Google Persistent Disk. So what do you do for storage there? You could rely on expensive third-party vendors, appliances, or other external storage solutions, or you can just use the commodity hardware that you're already running your Kubernetes cluster on in a hyper-converged type of scenario where you have your compute and you have your storage all on the same machines, and you can end up running a really reliable, high-performant pool of storage directly inside that Kubernetes cluster. So really, I think where Rook shines is providing storage on premises, and when you are running the hardware bare metal yourself. And the way I think that it's growing, though, is that storage in Kubernetes, it's amazingly done. It's done a very good job with abstracting storage to a volume level. But there's so many more types of storage that aren't just volumes. You've got databases, message queues, buckets, key value stores, all that sort of stuff. So I think we could take abstractions and for storage in Kubernetes further, so that more types of applications can run just as portably as other applications do right now with volumes.
So Rook, I was just looking at our notes, and Rook was the 15th hosted project, for the CNCF, and now today. I'm not sure if it was today, but etcd was announced, and that's the 33rd project. So the projects, it's actually, the number of projects have more than doubled in the past year.
Yes, and we don't know what we'll see in a year from now.
How do you keep up with that? I mean, you work on the side of the CNCF. How do you keep up with all that? Because because you're involved in a lot of the projects, right?
Yeah.
How do you manage it?
So one of the biggest benefits of having your projects at CNCF is that CNCF is not managing your project.
You're not managing it, but you guys are the organization,
Yep.
And you want to make sure that they're following the correct practices and having the code of conduct in place. So there's a lot of work, right?
Well, there is a lot of work, but it's much more work happening inside the communities. So again, as I mentioned, one of the biggest benefits of being a project within CNCF is that if you are donating the project to CNCF, you are still a project owner. You are still managing this project. Like, for example, with Rook, right? You can tell that the story, absolutely, it was the company and group of people who have developed this project originally before CNCF, before it was donated to CNCF. Still, the same people probably are still managing this project as the contributors, as the project leaders, and so on. So I would say that it's a great opportunity for us as for CNCF to host so many projects, but it's still also great to see so many people within these communities that are managing themselves.
So then tell me then about what the work CNCF does and what work you do in particular when you're looking, for the projects themselves. What's your role what is the job that you play then, with all the projects themselves?
Well, I would say that my job is distributed enough, and like I can tell about it for a long time. I'm mostly focused on Kubernetes-related efforts at CNCF. So I've joined CNCF. I've started contributing to Kubernetes around 3 years ago, and I started doing that before I've joined CNCF. So I'm working with Kubernetes so closely, like mostly for historical reasons, and I've been one of the co-founders of SIGPM Kubernetes community, which is focused on the product management related efforts and program management related efforts within the Kubernetes community. I'm working closely with SIG contributor experience, which is focused on onboarding the new contributors and giving them some instruments to contribute to Kubernetes. At the same time, I'm also focused on like some foundation-wide initiatives. For example, with the Ambassadors program, the CNCF Ambassadors program, the CNCF Meetups program. We also have a few ideas how to enhance the general way how can you get started as a contributor to CNCF, not to foundation itself, but to the CNCF projects. And that's initially that was a great job, that was a huge job that was done by the Kubernetes community, and how can you get started with contributing to Kubernetes. And now I'm just like migrating some of these ideas from Kubernetes community itself to CNCF wide.
And so, but why etcd? We know it's been a core part of Kubernetes. Is that really the real reason then?
It is extremely important for Kubernetes, but it's also like really valuable tool for like
right.
for all the kind of like cloud native kube storage ideas. Yeah.
So when you manage an engineering team, I'm sure there's dozens or hundreds of engineers who you work with in some capacity, and increasingly, as we well know, software is increasingly the core of a business, and open source is really becoming really kind of the foundation for software. So what we're almost seeing is open source software practices being used inside businesses, right? And so how do you manage your team when you have to think about software development in that open source context? How do you think about managing the time and the investment?
Okay, I think that's a very good question. I think that's a very challenging question as engineering leaders. So at any given time, you only have bounded resource. That resource has to be sliced up into 3 buckets usually. Especially when you're running SaaS, the DevOps is inevitable. So you have to actually bear the cost. But so that's number one. And you have to also, the PM is always, we want to deliver the features to the market faster than anybody else. So feature is the second bucket. And engineering oftentimes will generate bugs. So essentially these 3 buckets actually eats up most of the engineering time. So how to balance in between all of this is actually requires a lot of thought through process. So essentially I think the technology, the approaches that you do, how you do engineering is very, very important. So actually I want to actually go back to kind of the question you touched base on the CNCF. What CNCF does for the cloud native space, in my opinion, is that CNCF organization itself is actually following this microservice concept. If you look at the projects all over the place, it's many projects, yes. It's very hard to manage. However, each project does one thing very well. So that Microsoft concept is really resonating very well even within the CNCF itself. There's many projects, they all does one thing very well, and the CNCF provides this framework for them to work together so that we deliver one solution to the end to the customers, to the communities, eventually make the society better. So at the end of the day, it's all about applications. You run the application, you have these endpoints that allows the business to connecting with the end user. So really, I appreciate CNCF. Just take Harbor for instance. Ever since July 27, this year, July. Wow, it was like a while back. Yeah, but anyway, it's only July we enter into sandbox, and after that, the team has received a tremendous feedback from the open source community, and the team actually shaped out a very mission statement for the harbor, much more clear than before. It's really providing cloud native environment to confidently deliver distributed images for the end user. So that is really sets the stage for everything. So the team did a lot of work with the community's help, which gets the project into incubation. So I think a lot of the methodology is what really driving the engineering efficiency. If you do things right, if you follow the right architecture in this cloud native environment, and following the right KubeCon for sure, and you can balance these three buckets very well. Yep.
Yeah, I'd like also to add about that. Not only CNCF projects are making this ecosystem, but take a look at the CNCF landscape, where we have a few hundred different projects that solving different needs. That definitely not all of them are a part of CNCF, other CNCF projects, but they are those projects that are making this ecosystem so successful as it's today.
So what's your experiences compared to what you're hearing from Wei, Jared?
Yeah, so our experience with CNCF, we first open sourced the Rook project in 2016, and so we were running that project externally to the CNCF, as our own community for almost a year before we were admitted into, or we made the proposal to get admitted into the CNCF.
Why did you?
Well, there are a number of benefits. So there's two that I can think of, and I constantly run into them. So they're reinforced for me very often. One is the CNCF has done an amazing job at that, technical vetting, and kind of it's a stamp. Being admitted into the CNCF means that you've gone through this rigorous process of a technical vetting of the project, of the vision of it, the execution, the community, and it makes a statement that the project has met this set of criteria to be something that the community as a whole, a wider, broader audience, can start using. And so when I look at the CNCF, specifically the hosted projects, every single one of those are, that's a good project, that's a good project. They're all very high quality projects that a bar has been met and vetted. And then another thing I think is that we really saw in the Rook project was that the messaging or the scope of which you can reach new people, it was much bigger than when we were doing it on our own. When we got admitted into the CNCF, you could just look at the history of our stars on GitHub, and it was kind of going up, and then we got admitted to the CNCF, and it was just this giant leap of new contributors, new committers, new users, and all this new life that came running into the project, which was just amazing to see.
Yeah, and you both started with Sandbox, with CNCF Sandbox. Both projects started, and it's really good to see that.
The sandbox projects are the sandbox concept's pretty new, isn't it? I mean, within the past year or two, when did you start when did you introduce the sandbox?
As far as I remember, it was like a bit less than a year ago. But before that, before Sandbox, we had Inception level. So yeah.
Right.
Originally at CNCF we had 3 levels. It was Inception. The 3 levels of project. It was Inception, Incubation, and Graduation. Today we have Sandbox that replaced conceptually and it replaced conceptually Inception. So today we have Sandbox, Incubation, and Graduation, like graduated projects. Some projects like Rook, like Harbor, they joined CNCF as the Sandbox projects, and at the same time they showed they really meet the criteria of the incubation bar. So they've been promoted to the incubation, and for example with Envoy that was announced today, that Envoy is a graduated project. It joined Kubernetes and Prometheus as the CNCF graduated project. So that's yet another level of community recognition, yet another level of the end user recognition. So the graduated projects, they have the huge amount of contributors, they have huge amount of end users, and being a graduated means that you satisfy this demand.
So Jared, and when I'm thinking about the Rook project, I'm thinking about the time that you have to put into it. How do you manage that time that you put into it with your work that you have? Because you're building a startup in the process as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a good question, and that reminds me immediately that my own personal time and time of other people that are contributing to our community, and then also people that are helping build our startup Upbound at the same time too. Everyone's time is finite, and so you really have to make a prioritization of where your time and resources are going to go. So part of the code of conduct or the governance of the Rook project is that maintainers on the project need to be doing at least 25% of their time onto the Rook project. So that's already part of the expectation of being a maintainer on that project, is that you need to follow up with that and make sure that you're giving the project the proper attention that it requires. But then I'm also incredibly fortunate as well, where Upbound, my startup company, is we want to invest in these open source communities and these open source projects because that helps with our vision as well. So it's completely promoted and encouraged by my company and my employer to be heavily involved in open source projects. We just open sourced another project called Crossplane on Tuesday, so that's just 1 week old today. And so almost 100% of my time is spent on open source projects, which I am very fortunate and grateful to be able to do.
How do you then manage your business?
So thankfully I'm not the only person at the company, but we also we truly do see these open source projects as not only opening new scenarios and enabling new things for the community in general, but also pushing our business forward as well. So it's good for the community. It's also good for our business as well.
One of the interesting things about Kubernetes is how complex it is, and because when you're thinking about Kubernetes, you do have to think all the way down the stack, right? But it's also bringing these base technologies, rising the stack in some respect too, like to create those abstractions. But it has to go. But there's the storage considerations, there's networking considerations, and then there's then all the application development on top of that through continuous delivery on and on and on. There's still a lot to be done, isn't there? There's still a lot of projects that are going to need to emerge to help kind of solve all the number of use cases that we can't even possibly dream of, really, that might be here in 5 years or something. So what is it that you're trying to what is it that the approach that VMware is taking so you can scale out your own engineering efforts for these open source projects that will continue to be core to the business?
Yeah, so I think as VMware, our company strategic, one of the strategy that VMware always holds the vision is the world is going to be cloud-based, and it's not going to just be one cloud. So this multi-cloud, hybrid cloud vision is always in the blood for VMware. So I think Kubernetes actually does provide, as you mentioned, the nice abstraction for the VMware to actually materialize this vision. So essentially, all of these open source the efforts such as the conformance certified Kubernetes and cluster APIs that are very popular as of today, all actually as evidence from VMware standpoint of view is actually the evidence for this technology to be the de facto abstraction layer for our structure play out this multi-cloud technology to deliver to the end user. Sure, the journey is actually still very long, but I think with all of these open source efforts coming from community, actually coming from the customers, I think it's just a matter of time for us to realize that into the next iteration.
Right. So what are some of the programs you're developing now to help keep up with this scale of contributors that are entering projects, to help kind of these projects? I know you're not involved in the management of them, but what you were saying before is you're working on contributor guidelines and efforts such as those. What are the efforts you're taking? What are the efforts that you have underway to continue to be able to scale that effort so you can kind of meet the needs that contributors really have?
Yeah. So I would split your question in two parts. First of all, I'm involved into Kubernetes community
Right.
most of all, and we recently released the non-coding contributors guide. So the non-coding contributors guide is the great sample of how can you get started with contributions to an open source project, being not a software developer. So my personal experience is that I've been a system administrator in my previous time. DevOps engineer and so on, but I've never been a software developer, and I don't have an experience in developing software itself. But I have some PM background, some DevOps engineering background, and so on. So I figured out that I can be available for Kubernetes community a few years ago as a person who can deliver something outside of the code base, and that's why we are actively involved into the SIG release, for example, SIG PM, SIG contributor experience. All these groups that are not delivering code itself, but delivering something else, like some another value of developing some part of the project. And a few months ago, we released we at Kubernetes community we released the non-coding contributor guide, which allows you to understand how can you get started with contributing to Kubernetes, being not a software developer. What are the areas at Kubernetes where can you donate your time? It can be documentation writing, it can be PM work, it can be release team, and so on. So that was one of the efforts I've been mostly involved in the previous time. Also, we are currently at the early beginning of developing something like the CNCF-wide contributors guide. We don't have any strong guidelines how can you contribute to these projects, because again, it's projects' responsibility on developing the guidelines how can you specifically deliver code to these projects. But we have some foundation-wide efforts. For example, again, ambassadors program, meetup program. These are all the contributions to the community space. They're not the coding contributions, but they are contributions to community. There are also some programs like CNCF participates in Google Summer of Code, which is a great initiative for the new contributors to get started with contributing something. And as far as I remember, there was a Rook student this year who delivered some projects there. So yeah, we have enough on our plate on how can you get started with contributing to the cloud native world, and not specifically to the projects themselves.
So storage, storage is becoming a much more important topic. There was the Cloud Native Storage Day here this week that Upwork was a part of. And so how is Rook looking to extend itself into 2019? I'm sure you have your work is in production now. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. But what is it do you have on your mind as you move into the new year for the project itself?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alex. And the Cloud Native Storage Day event yesterday was great. So it was good seeing you there, and thanks for taking part of that. That was just a great event. Hopefully next time we can get a much bigger room for the massive wait list that we had to have.
600 people.
Yeah, 600 people on that wait list. But I think that kind of something getting back to what I was talking about before. So Rook is very good at being able to take your local storage on premises, bare metal, and turn that into a functional, highly scalable, performant storage cluster in those types of scenarios. But what I see though is, what we were talking about earlier of, these multi-cloud scenarios coming into play, where really what's I think is important is that power of choice, being able to run your workloads in, the optimized for cost, optimized for, geographic location, feature set, all that sort of stuff. So that's where I think that there's a really good opportunity here to extend the Rook project, and also in combination with some other projects like the Crossplane project that I was just talking about there a little bit before, where in a given scenario, being able to choose the best place to run your workload and meet all of your storage needs, like maybe it's a database and you can use Amazon's RDS or Google's Cloud SQL, but having that choice be figured out at runtime in a portable way, so the application author doesn't have to worry about those details. But what ends up happening is that the application runs in the best location at runtime is just a great place to get to, and really takes advantage and unlocks that power of choice that you get from multi-cloud scenarios.
So is part of your effort to increase the number of runtimes that you can work across?
Yeah, we've been doing that with Rook. So with the release that we just put out a couple days ago, it's been a very busy week, I must say that, when I'm remembering all the things that have happened. But yeah, we doubled the number of storage storage providers in Rook. We went from 3 of them to 6 of them, so now that's doubled. And what Ihor was talking about earlier is that one of them, the NFS, Network File System Support in Rook, was done by a Google Summer of Code intern, our students. So that was amazing to be able to have that program where students all around the world can get involved in open source and contribute something, and it's a real feature that's shipping and being used out in production. So it's great to get the community involved in ways like that.
Great. So going into 2019 for you and your work and like the open source projects that you're working on, Harbor in particular, what are your thoughts? Like, what's ahead?
Yeah, so I think as Harbor entering CNCF, as I mentioned earlier, the mission statement is more clear, and there's this broader community that we have to work with. So one of the things team actually does is that making sure that Harbor is even more open source friendly. So essentially, we are internally doing some React actually, so that the system is more modularized. So essentially, we can more working together with non-Harbor registry service, for instance, to replicate images. That's just one use case. Is actually coming from the open source community. So all of these requirements is from the open source community. So I think Harbor release 1.8 is actually already in flight, and in 3 months' time, we already have something put on the agenda for 1.9. So the list goes on and on. So essentially, the community actually is helping a lot more shaping what Harbor should be supposed to deliver. And also, another thing back to the Rook's vision about multi-cloud. I think we are going to do something in this multi-cloud setup. How we can really provide global distributing images in the multi-cloud setup in the most geo-efficient way. Yeah, so those are the some of the things that Harbor team is thinking, led by the community, of course. Yeah.
Are you just going to take the year off?
A bit, I'm jet lagged.
How about you for 2019 and some of the projects that you're going to continue to working on and developing, and where you see the greatest need now for the contributors out there?
So, the interesting fact that my prediction last year about the current year was some big progress in the world of serverless computing and machine learning. And I'm really happy to see that there are projects these days that are really closing this gap in the market. For example, Kubeflow, which is a machine learning framework built on top of Kubernetes, or multiple serverless platforms that are using Kubernetes, like OpenFaaS or Knative that was presented today at the keynote. So I would say that the general direction of the community and the industry movement will not change a lot, but we can definitely see more projects and more community involvement into developing them. I'm not speaking about CNCF projects specifically,
right,
but about the projects at all that exist on the market, like about the number of projects that we may have on CNCF landscape these days.
Well, thank you all for your time today. I appreciate it so much. Wei, Ihor, Jared, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It was great.
Thank you very much.
Chad, watch yourself.
Gosh, look at that number.